and subscribe to our channel.
So what are you cooking tonight?
I'm just gonna do a little bit of basil. You know, it's mainly just to talking about my past, but I'm gonna do a little demo on basil oil, just show how to render out some basil oil because it's nice, and then I'm gonna let people try some of that.
Your life through food.
Yeah. You want to smell?
Whether you explain your life through food.
What does it smell like?
It smells like salad.
It doesn't smell like salad. It smells like basil.
Does it smell like basil? Basil is one of my favorite.
Does that smell good, Lelykins?
It smells like basil.
Basil is fun. And the whole reason I'm doing this demo is because basil is...
Hey, that looks like a bouquet.
It does. It's a bouquet of basil.
A basil bouquet.
A basil bouquet.
Mm-hmm.
Are you gonna put it in the bowl?
I'm gonna take off the leaves, put them in the bowl, and then I'm gonna do some fun things with it. But you'll have to stay tuned to see.
Yep.
They can't divulge all my secrets.
Spoiler alert.
Yep, spoiler.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. Once you put them into boiling water, they cook down to absolutely little bit.
You remember when we used to do crepes? Probably not, because you weren't really into the spinach.
Yeah.
We'll do them again sometime, and you'll see how like a whole bowl of spinach turns into like my
Yeah,
crepe.
all that work. Not as much work as fava beans, but
Yeah.
I have each year Marco grows out basil for me, and we buy like 50 pounds of basil, and he just picks the plants and just rips them out of the ground.
Oh, huh.
Brings them to us. So then we go through this process of washing all the basil and cooking the basil down and processing the basil into oil and pesto for the hospital. That lasts only a couple of months, but at least we're using local products, which is kind of cool. You know what I'm really excited about?
What?
I'm excited about my garden. That's what I'm all juiced up about these days.
Oh.
Because I have I just planted my tomatoes and peppers.
Oh, I love tomatoes.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
She loves tomatoes.
Oh man, I love tomatoes too.
They're pretty
I
good.
ate them before.
You have?
Yeah.
Wow. So for the first time,
That leaf in the trash.
I am, because it's a little tarnished. Do you see it? You want to throw it in there?
Yeah.
There you go.
Good job.
And also, I got ready for spinach.
You know what's fun about basil? If you rub it a little bit, here, take this leaf and just crunch it up
Yep.
and then smell it. Doesn't that smell good?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one of those sensory memories about basil, but it's kind of an embarrassing story. Basil.
I think we should put them in the trash.
I think. Let's do it. There you go. There's that one.
Good helping.
I'm going to take this back and feed it to my birds. I enjoy cooking with herbs, and one of the things that I enjoy doing is that I like preserving herbs in the season so we can take them into the off season. Much of that has to do with drying some of drying the thymes and the sages and the bay laurel leaves, and we just do that on perforated racks, on speed racks, in a dry area of the kitchen, and we can do it. And you just watch out for any sort of mold that might happen in that. But you can also do it up above an oven and just get a nice dry environment just to dry out herbs. Again, you see in the old-fashioned kitchens where people just twine them up and hang them over above the hearth, and that's their dried herbs that they pluck down and put into the soup, and that's kind of a cool way to go around it. I like to take things like when the season is on, you've got basil coming out the ears, you've got dillweed coming out the ears, and so making that available into the winter season, you have to process it. So in things like parsley, that you can just simply blend into an oil and preserve it, and then freeze that oil in pulses, be it ice cube tray or little plastic containers, and then you can bring them out and you're using that in a salad, and then you're using that parsley. Same thing with dill. You can just take dill and just buzz it with some oil, and then keep that refrigerated. And then anytime you're making that, salmon salad, you can just pull some out and put a spoon into it, of dill weed into it. Basil is a different game altogether, and each year, so at the hospital we buy shares each year with local farmers. So we call it the institutional CSA, which we last year we spent like 20 grand. And institutional CSAs where we're buying vouchers from local farmers, and then we spend those vouchers throughout the year, and that forces our hand to buy local product. So Marco will call me from Midori and say, hey, basil's on. How much you got? I have 50 pounds of basil. And so I'm like, bring it to me. But when Marco brings me basil, it's actually a basil plant that he just plucked from the ground, put into a box, and brings it to me. And so we take the rootstock off, we wash it, and then we process it down. And today I'd like to show you how we go about processing it. And I hate to use the metaphor, two birds with one stone, but you'll see what I'm talking about when I get through it, okay? Basil is kind of a fun one. My first memory of basil, and this whole thing tonight is gonna get really personal. When Kelly asked me to do this, and I thought, whoa, you can't talk about a 30-year, 35-year career without getting into your life. So I'll share some experiences with you. Basil, my first real memory with basil was at the tenement gardens in England. I lived in a small village, Benson, which I'll talk about later. And we had this old elm tree right next to a stream, and across the stream was the tenement gardens where you could, more or less rent a plot of land and garden it. And in the summertime, all the basil along the river, the stream bed would volunteer. So basil will be wafting as you're hanging out at the dump in the treehouse. So that's my favorite one. Certain characteristics about basil to process, and that one of the things is that if you kind of get manhandle basil, you can easily bruise it. So you want to be gentle with it, and that goes in when you're cutting basil using a really sharp knife. Some people actually use scissors to do a chiffonade or julienne basil, but if you have a really sharp knife, yeah, I'll show you how to do it. Should I do that? Ooh, then you'll see some of that. Again, really sharp knife, but when you use a knife, it should be well balanced. That's wielding your knife. Yeah. When you use a knife, you either want to be how should I do this? Okay. Whenever you use a knife, I want you to think about John Travolta doing the disco dance. Down, 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 right this. And this is the body language. This is the motion your body wants to take. I see too many people doing this, and that's manipulating their body around a piece of basil. When it comes to doing a chiffonade, which is a cross-cut of basil, if it were a julienne, it would be the length of the leaf, but since we're going across the leaf, it's a chiffonade. So if I just pluck some of this basil, and it's basil, yeah? And so again, this finger should always be, I like my fingers, so crunch them together. I see too many people doing this, and that's a good way to cut yourself. When I hold the knife, I pinch the knife at the balance point and let my hand fall down. And I'm either pulling the knife through, see I pull the tip through and the heel drops down. And so that's pulling the knife, or I'm pushing it through like that. You'll notice that thing called the steel, which I forgot to bring my steel today, but that helps keep the knife in true, keeps a nice edge on it. If you put your fingers together under nice light, you can go back and forth and you actually see where the knife is flat. And then you can bring it back into true with that steel. With basil, again, just being very gentle, if I just lightly turn it, and then I can just pull that knife through it, like that. And that is a chiffonade of basil. Keeping those fingers tight, I can use that knife against my knuckle just to measure that cut. And after a while, it just gets to this whole thing where you don't need some of your senses at all. You're just going for it all day long. So there's a nice chiffonade of basil. And this, I mean, if I'm doing like if I'm doing something with a bruschetta with tomatoes and the Parmesan, I'll do a nice chiffonade of basil for that. But the thing that I really wanted to demo today was processing out some basil. So here on my little electric induction burner, I've got boiling water. And if you've never used an induction burner, they're really cool things. All you need is a stainless steel pan that you can stick a magnet to, which these things, I mean, in this day and age, you need a class 1 hood system with all the fire suppression to actually cook things under. This one you can get by in a classroom, you know, so you can do virtually anything on this. And the coolest thing that I've seen is actually an induction burner that is a wok. They can actually have a wok in it, heats up instantly. The fastest way I can boil water is through the induction burner, okay? So what I have here is a bowl of ice water, and notice I have a colander, a fine mesh colander in that, because I'm gonna blanch my basil for a split second, then I'm gonna pull it out, and if I pulled it out and put it on the table, since it's hot, it's gonna keep on cooking, it's carryover cooking. And the worst thing in the world is when that basil goes from this green to a vibrant green to a MASH 4077 green, yeah? Or the green of your shirt, kind of like dulls out.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, ugh, I want vibrant colors when I'm doing this stuff. But what we can do is if we plunge it, pull it, arrest the cooking process in the water, that's taking heat out of the equation, cooling everything down, then it keeps that vibrant green color. So, should we do that?
Yes.
Let's do it. Here we go. I'm gonna do this in 2 flushes. I'm gonna make sure my ice water is right next to it. I'm gonna plunge it in, boom, and you see it turns that instant bright green color. I'm gonna pull it out, it's bright green, plunge it into my ice water. The thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get my hands in there and stir it, because you can get little hot spots in that even when it's in the ice water, okay? So there's that. Get the rest of it out of there. Cool. All right, and then I'll take the rest of it, let that, so again, this is cold, I'm putting it into boiling water, it brings that temperature of boiling water down, but now I'm seeing bubbles get a little bit bigger. I think we're good. And I'll plunge the rest of this in, boom, get it down in there, and it's literally just a couple of seconds, and then pop it out, drain it off into the ice water again, like so. Boom. All right, boom, and then there's all that, and really make sure there's no hot spots in there. Now becomes this important part of things. Let me pause this, and that is that we cool it down, but we want to pull as much moisture out of that as possible. So what I'll do is I'll bring a little sheet pan out, and I'll just line this with paper towels, like so. And again, it's not WWF here. We're not trying to really squeeze the mess out of it. We're just trying to get as much moisture out as we possibly can with a gentle squeeze.
So when you're doing this for your job, you're doing 50 pounds?
We do batches. We have the big tilt skillet with boiling water, and it's blanching it, putting it into the ice water, getting out of the ice water, and see carpal tunnel in the wrist because you're squeezing this stuff out. But then the secret trick is that once we get it to this point, is that we'll just spread it out on this right here, and I'll put this in the refrigerator. I'll label it up, and I'll put it in the refrigerator, really dab it as much of the moisture out as possible. And we have, they're not terry cloth towels, they're just cotton towels that are really nice and white and clean that we can dab hey there.
Hey there.
We can dab them just a little bit. And what I mean by dabbing is just blotting with more paper towels. So there's that. And then if you imagine, I'm just gonna take some of this and just press some of that moisture out of it. And then at home you don't have this, but in an industrial kitchen you'll have a big walk-in refrigerator with speed racks. And essentially that turns into this. And this is been blanched, but it's dried out. And you can see where it has its effects where it turns it a little bit darker.
Yeah.
Right? So you want this to stay as bright green as possible without tarnishing out too much. Okay? So just for easeability, and the problem is when I blend this, I'm going to put this all into a blender with oil, blend it all up. The perfect situation is let it macerate for a little bit, and then I'm going to strain it through a fine mesh strainer with old school was cheesecloth. You can use paper towels, but we use industrial coffee filters. Yeah, to do it. And so what I'm going to do next, and this still has moisture in it, the oil that I make will still have some of that moisture in it. So when you're decanting your oil after this long process, you'll have this oil in a container, and you'll see the murky levels, and then but above it will be this emerald green crystal clear, and that's what you're looking for to get there. And you can siphon that off, and then that's what you're dressing your plates with for decoration. But I'll show you some pictures in a little while. But this is always good. I don't know if you've ever been to an Italian restaurant that has the bread presentation, instead of having butter or a whipped butter with something. I remember butter presentations were piping roses onto a little tea spiral and putting that onto a plate with fresh baked bread, and it was like, whoa. And then we'd make our own boursin, more or less, and pipe that onto. So butter presentations or bread presentations or something. But if you take balsamic vinegar and then just float some of this emerald green oil into it on a nice colored plate, then you see that through the, and then the mixture of that oil and that vinegar together on a piece of bread is what that fat and the vinegar is something really, really special. Yeah. So let me get into this. And again, that you can tell that what that did to my drying that out a little bit did to my basil there.
Is there a problem with a centrifuge, like pulling the water out with that, or?
Oh, I've never tried a centrifuge, but that sounds cool. Yeah, just get as much moisture out. And again, I've done this on the quick where I'm just pushing down and just getting as much moisture out as possible, and then taking that, chopping up and blending it, and that gives me vibrant green as what we're looking for. So now's the part that I change out my equipment really quickly. This is all fun and games, I promise. And I'll take this and just swap this out real quick. These things are amazing. I saw one of these at the Goodwill the other day.
Wow.
Yeah, I was just like, somebody didn't know what they were selling. And then I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to play with a Vitamix blender, but I don't know a kitchen that I've ever worked in that didn't have one of these. And essentially, it's a gear instead of the paddles that if you're not right, you'll burn the bottom of your blender top out, or the blender base, you'll burn it out. They'll just erode those things if they're not on there all the way. So this is an actual gear driven, and it's kind of cool because it's like a throttle. And what I mean by that is that if you turn it on, let's see if it'll turn on. You can. It's like a throttle on a motorcycle. So it's kind of fun like that. Then this is what they call a chinois. Yeah. So if you could only buy one, would I buy this or this fine mesh colander? And the answer is that I would get this, because I also have an affection for quinoa. And quinoa is a small plant grain that when you cook it, pasta method is the way it should be cooked rather than absorption method. And you run it through something like that, half of it goes down the drain. Yeah, and plugs up your drain. But if you have something like this, then it stays where it needs to stay. But you're still exiting all the water off. So, and if ever you see one of these at the Goodwill, buy it. I got this one at the Goodwill. You can tell I go there a lot. So again, so the thing that I'm trying to do, and in some of the big restaurants, when you're really refining this stuff, you're processing this stuff down, is I would take all of my blender parts, this and the top, and I put it in the freezer just to cool it down, because your enemy is going to be friction, is what you're dealing with. And so if I just take this, thinking that's really ice cold, and I put in my basil that I've just chopped up, so the blender doesn't have to work so hard, because if the blender's working hard, it's making friction happening, and so it'll heat up, and that's what you don't want to do. And then there's that. Okay, so there's that. Before I do anything, I'll pop that right there. And here again is these industrial coffee filters that are a cool thing just to have. I've got my stash that I keep at home for all sorts of neat things. And then if I just take this and fold a cornucopia out of that industrial coffee filter and pop it right here, like so. Now I can use a couple of oils. I can use canola oil, which is rapeseed oil, grown in Canada predominantly. So it's Canada, C-A-N, oil, low acid. That's an acronym for canola oil. The marketing on rapeseed oil just didn't go anywhere. So, but also you could use grapeseed oil. The thing that you want to look for is the oil doesn't have a hue, its own natural hue to it. Like an extra virgin olive oil is already that army green color, so that's just going to tarnish down our basil. So if I take some of this grapeseed oil, which is a nice crystal clear oil, look, and then pop that right there, and then put this here, and then the number one rule about a blender, make sure the top is on and make sure you double up. In the past, if you're pureeing a hot soup, for instance, that there's a steam layer that gets exhausted in a split second when you put that blender on. My kitchen at home has blueberries on the ceiling from where my daughter was experimenting with smoothies. And it's always just rule of thumb that if you've ever had squash bisque hit the ceiling of your kitchen, it's not fun. But also that hot soup everything just goes up. So put the top on, put a nice towel or torchon over the top of it, and that'll protect you a little bit. Okay, so here goes. I'm just gonna amp this up, and I'm gonna do it really quick, and I'm gonna stop it, and then I'm gonna feel the bottom, not that hot, and then I'm gonna just put this into my coffee filter, and I could blend it a little bit more, but you can already see that the oil is coming out, and it's even as dark as this basil is now. I look at it like, oh, I should have just done this fresh and just had that water layer, but you can already see the oil coming out. Now I'm gonna let this do its thing for a little while, but I'm gonna give you an idea of what you can get. And in a little while, when I finish my presentation, we'll eat some of this. Does that sound good? Yeah. So you have to stick around to have the little try. That's the way I snag you in. So I'm just gonna clean up. Was that helpful?
Yeah,
oh,
that was great.
Here's the most important thing. Ready for it?
Yeah.
So we're processing this basil to get basil oil to be fancy with, right? But what if... Yes, exactly. If I come right here, and this is where it really takes a different feel to things. If I, and this is just to illustrate how sexy you can get with food. And I'm gonna go deep today. But this is just a white plate, and there's basil oil on the white plate.
Oh.
But the thing we're really looking for in this is this, my cooks call it basil shake, which I don't think is a good term,
Is that
but
the byproduct?
just the byproduct of it. But essentially, it's this. Boom. And then, so asking this question of, if I take this and add olive oil, and really this is saturated with oil, this needed to sit in the refrigerator a little longer just to expel a little bit more of that grapeseed oil out of it. But it's going to be a blob and then beautiful, vibrant green oil coming out of it. But if we take then that shake or that pulp that's left behind after a couple of days, we add olive oil to it, Parmesan cheese and pine nuts, then we have pesto. That you just do this cold, pasta with just the pesto. It's a pesto pasta salad that you get at the co-op, more or less. We freeze this pulp, and when we make our pasta sauces, we're adding that pulp into pasta sauce for basil. And that is what I'm looking for processing basil from the summertime when it's growing like mad into the wintertime. Okay? So that's what I want to see. But I'm going to let that just stay there because it's so cool looking. Well, in fact, I'm going to put it right up here. And we'll just let it bleed out and look cool. Okay. I'm going to clean up, and then you're really going to get it. Yeah? Okay, here goes.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So you said something that kind of blew my mind. I'm going to ask you about it. So you said quinoa, cook it pasta ways, don't cook it by absorption.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing it wrong my whole life.
Yes.
So why the difference?
Well, and so we got time. So, quinoa. I'm going to tell this story in a little while, but quinoa. I worked for a Peruvian restaurant in Portland, and I remember there was a kitchen lady that I worked in the kitchen with that took my hand and showed me how to cook traditional Peruvian cuisine. And it's an American thing that, and we relate it, Americans know how to cook rice absorption method. That is 1 knuckle of rice, 2 knuckles of water. Yeah? And you put it up to a boil, turn down to a simmer. In a couple of minutes, it's done. And you fluff it up with some butter and a fork. Yeah? And that's how we cook rice in the United States. So they took that same idea of saying, how do we market this second most nutritious thing a human can consume to the American market? And that is in a box, and that is using the absorption method. 1 knuckle of quinoa, 2 knuckles of liquid, which gets you cooked quinoa. But here's the kicker, that in nature, birds don't eat quinoa because there's this very astringent sap that is on quinoa. And in fact, when they have quinoa, or the number 1 nutritious thing you can eat as amaranth, yeah, it's got this saponin on the grain of the plant grain. And they have to soak it in a lye solution to get that away. Or I think Keith Kissler at Finn River just washes it really well. And it gets that saponin off of it in order to give you a grain that's there. But when you cook it absorption method, you had a lot of people say, I really don't like quinoa. Why is that? Because it's got this astringent flavor, because it's the residual of that saponin on that grain of quinoa. So if you cook it pasta method, and you can control the cooking of it because you can do the al dente, which is taking that piece of quinoa and putting it between your 2 front teeth, and you want to bite down on it, and it's going to have this little tiny speck of uncooked right in the middle. It will not have lost its C, where if you've overcooked quinoa, it's a mush, and you see all these C pieces in it, it will have not lost that. So it's this very, if you understand the concept of when you pull something hot off a stove, the residual heat is carryover cooking it. If you take that in consideration, that Well, in this moment that I'm taking that quinoa, straining it through this fine chinois and running cold water over it, then all that astringency is going down the drain in that big pot of pasta water, more or less. And it's a beautiful thing. I always cook an overload of quinoa, and then some becomes a quinoa salad, some becomes quinoa risotto, some becomes just crusted quinoa on a piece of fish. Some of it becomes, instead of breadcrumbs, you're using it to do chicken cordon bleu with quinoa, which is a gluten-free quinoa with the second most nutritious thing on it. It's super cool stuff. I love quinoa. In fact, I'll talk more about my wife later, but my wife hosted the International Quinoa Symposium here at Fort Worden a couple of years ago, and they invited me to do a cooking demo. Boy, did I clean the kitchen at my house good that time. And I did this little video on quinoa, and it's online. So if you look up those two names, you'll find it. Yeah.